The gunshot rang out across the dusty main street of Sweetwater Creek, silencing the crowd that had gathered to witness the spectacle unfolding at the train station on that sweltering summer day in 1876. Nora Zimmerman stood defiantly on the wooden platform, her emerald green dress stained with dust, and her auburn hair falling loose from its carefully pinned arrangement. The two men gripping her arms froze at the sound, their eyes darting to the tall figure who had just fired his revolver into the air. Quentin Irving lowered his smoking Colt, his weathered face hard as granite beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "I believe the lady made herself clear," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly silent station. "She's staying right here." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the stranger who had just interrupted her forced departure. She had never seen him before, yet there he stood, defending her as if he'd known her all his life. His piercing blue eyes met hers briefly, before returning to the men who still maintained their grip on her arms. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the taller of the two men snarled, his Boston accent thick with contempt. "We have authorization from her father to escort Miss Zimmerman back east. Now step aside before there's trouble." Quentin didn't budge. Instead, he stepped closer, his spurs jingling with each deliberate movement. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. "That authorization mean anything to you, miss?" he asked, addressing Nora directly. "No," she answered, her voice stronger than she expected. "My father has no right to force me back to Boston. I am 22 years old and have built a life here." She struggled against her captor's grip. "I will not be treated like property to be shipped across the country at his whim." The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. The conductor stood nervously at the steps, pocket watch in hand. "We're departing in 3 minutes, folks," he announced, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation unfolding on his platform. The shorter of Nora's captors, a red-faced man with mutton chops, pulled a document from his breast pocket. "We have legal papers, mister, signed by Judge Harrison himself. The lady's father has concerns about her mental state and has appointed us as her guardians for the journey." Quentin's expression didn't change. "Papers can be bought, especially from Judge Harrison." He took another step forward. "I'm only going to say this once more. Let the lady go." A tense silence fell over the platform. The train's engine hissed steam, punctuating the standoff. Nora could feel the grip on her arms tightening painfully. She didn't know this cowboy, had never laid eyes on him before today, but in that moment, she trusted him more than the men her father had sent. "You're making a mistake," the taller man warned, reaching inside his jacket. Quentin moved with surprising speed for his size. Before the Boston man could draw his weapon, Quentin had the barrel of his Colt pressed against the man's temple. "No, friend. You're the one making a mistake. Now, for the last time, let her go." The red-faced man released Nora's arm first, stepping back with his hands raised. His companion hesitated a moment longer before reluctantly releasing her as well. "Miss Zimmerman has friends in this town," Quentin said, his voice carrying to the onlookers. "She's chosen to make Sweetwater Creek her home, and we respect that choice. Now, you gentlemen have a train to catch." Nora rubbed her arms where the men had gripped her, watching as they retreated toward the train, casting furious glances over their shoulders. "This isn't over," the taller one called out. "Mr. Zimmerman will hear of this interference." "Be sure to tell him she's under our protection now," Quentin replied calmly. He holstered his weapon only after the two men had boarded the train. As the locomotive pulled away from the station in a cloud of black smoke, Nora found herself standing face to face with her unlikely rescuer. Up close, she could see the laugh lines around his eyes and the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with streaks of silver at his temples. "Thank you," she said simply, still trying to process everything that had happened. Quentin nodded, adjusting his hat. "No lady should be forced to go somewhere against her will, Miss Zimmerman." He hesitated, then added, "I'm Quentin Irving, sheriff's deputy." Nora's eyes widened. "You're with the law, but I've been in Sweetwater Creek for 6 months and never seen you before." "Just returned from escorting a prisoner to Yuma," he explained. "Been away nearly 2 months." He looked around at the dispersing crowd. "Seems I came back just in time." A woman pushed through the onlookers and rushed to Nora's side. "Nora, are you hurt?" Clara Bennett, the owner of the boarding house where Nora had taken residence, examined her with concerned eyes. "I'm fine, Clara, thanks to Deputy Irving here." Clara turned to Quentin with grateful eyes. "God bless you, Deputy. Those awful men showed up yesterday, asking questions all over town. When they found out Nora was teaching at the school, they went straight there and tried to take her away in front of the children." Quentin's expression darkened. "And Sheriff Wilson?" "Out of town until tomorrow," Clara replied. "Rode to Silver Springs for his sister's wedding." Nora smoothed down her crumpled dress. "They claimed my father was ill and needed me home immediately. When I questioned them further, they produced papers claiming I was mentally unstable and required an escort." Her voice shook slightly. "My father has never accepted my decision to leave Boston. This is just his latest attempt to control me." Quentin nodded thoughtfully. "Well, they'll report back to him soon enough. You should expect more trouble." He glanced at the train, now a distant smudge on the horizon. "Why did you come west, Miss Zimmerman, if you don't mind my asking?" Nora lifted her chin. "To teach. There's a shortage of qualified teachers out here, and I wanted to make a difference. In Boston, I was just another society daughter being paraded at parties to find a suitable husband." She smiled faintly. "Here, I'm Miss Zimmerman, the schoolteacher. The children respect me for my knowledge, not for my family name or dowry." "Noble reasons," Quentin said with approval. "But your father's men will return, possibly with more convincing documentation. We should speak with Judge Peters when he returns from circuit. He might be able to help establish your independence legally." Clara took Nora's arm. "Come back to the boarding house, dear. You've had quite a shock. A cup of tea and some rest will do you good." Nora nodded gratefully, then turned to Quentin. "Thank you again, Deputy Irving. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't intervened." He touched the brim of his hat. "Just doing my job, Miss Zimmerman. I'll stop by tomorrow to make sure you're all right." As Nora walked away with Clara, she could feel Quentin's eyes following her. Despite the day's trauma, she felt oddly secure knowing he was watching over her. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a welcome respite from the previous day's heat. Nora sat at her desk in the one-room schoolhouse, reviewing her lessons for the day. She had decided that maintaining her routine was the best way to demonstrate that she wouldn't be intimidated. A knock on the door interrupted her preparations. She looked up to see Quentin standing in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. Without his gun belt, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, he looked less intimidating but no less capable. "Good morning, Deputy," she greeted him, setting down her chalk. "Miss Zimmerman." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "I wanted to check on you before your students arrived." "I'm quite well, thank you." She gestured to a chair near her desk. "Please sit." Quentin settled his large frame onto the small wooden chair, looking somewhat out of place among the children's desks. "I spoke with Judge Peters this morning. He returned earlier than expected. He says he can help you file for legal independence from your father's authority, but it might take some time." Nora nodded. "I expected as much. The law doesn't look favorably upon women who seek to make their own decisions." "Not usually," Quentin agreed, but Judge Peters is a fair man. And it helps that you're established here with respectable employment." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. I telegraphed some contacts in Boston. Your father, Edmund Zimmerman, is not ill as those men claimed. In fact, he's in robust health and recently announced his engagement to a widow half his age." Nora felt a jolt of surprise, followed quickly by understanding. "So that's it. He's remarrying and wants me back under his control before I can contest any changes to my inheritance from my mother." "That would be my guess." Quentin studied her face. "Does that knowledge change your determination to stay?" "Not in the slightest," Nora replied firmly. "I came west for independence, not money. My mother would have understood that." She smiled sadly. "She always encouraged my education, even when my father thought it was a waste of time for a girl." Quentin leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "Miss Zimmerman, I think you should consider staying somewhere other than Clara's boarding house for a while. Those men know where to find you there. Where would you suggest?" "My sister owns a small ranch about 3 miles out of town. She has plenty of room, and it's far more defensible than the boarding house if those men return with reinforcements." Nora considered the offer. "I wouldn't want to impose on your sister. Rebecca would welcome the company. She's alone since her husband passed last year, and the ranch hands bunk in the outbuilding." He added with a slight smile, "Besides, she was a teacher herself before she married. You'd have much to talk about." Before Nora could respond, they heard the sound of children's voices approaching. "My students are arriving," she said, rising from her desk. "I'll consider your offer, Deputy Irving. Thank you." Quentin stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll come by after school lets out. Sheriff Wilson should be back by then, and we can discuss further arrangements." As he walked to the door, Nora called after him, "Deputy." He turned, his expression questioning. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features. "Let's just say I have a particular dislike for men who think they can force their will on others, especially women trying to make their own way." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, passing the first of her students in the doorway. Throughout the day, Nora found her thoughts returning to Quentin Irving. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and integrity that she found refreshing after the artifice of Boston society. But she reminded herself not to romanticize him. He was simply doing his job, protecting a citizen of Sweetwater Creek from outside interference. When school ended, she was not surprised to find Quentin waiting outside, leaning against a post. What did surprise her was the elegant woman standing beside him, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket. "Miss Zimmerman," Quentin called, straightening as she approached. "This is my sister, Rebecca Irving Thornton." Rebecca stepped forward with a warm smile, extending her hand. She shared her brother's blue eyes, though her hair was a lighter shade of brown, and she lacked the weathered look that years in the sun had given him. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman," Rebecca said. "Quentin has told me about your situation, and I've come to extend a personal invitation to stay at my ranch until this matter is resolved." Nora shook the offered hand. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Thornton, but I wouldn't want to burden you with my problems." "Nonsense," Rebecca dismissed with a wave. "It would be a pleasure to have another woman on the property. The conversation of ranch hands, while colorful, becomes tiresome after a while." Her eyes twinkled. "Besides, Quentin tells me you're a teacher." "My late husband and I never had children, but we always planned to. I've kept all the books we collected for them, gathering dust. Perhaps you could advise me on donating them to your school." The genuine warmth in Rebecca's manner dissolved Nora's hesitation. "In that case, I accept your kind offer, Mrs. Thornton. Thank you." "Wonderful, And please call me Rebecca." She turned to her brother. "Quentin, would you mind collecting Miss Zimmerman's belongings from the boarding house while I show her around town?" "I need to pick up supplies at the general store anyway." Quentin nodded. "I'll take care of it." To Nora, he added, "Sheriff Wilson is back and aware of the situation. He's sending a telegram to the authorities in Boston to verify the legitimacy of those papers the men presented yesterday." As Quentin departed for the boarding house, Rebecca linked her arm through Nora's. "Now, while my brother attends to your luggage, why don't you tell me more about yourself? I find it terribly brave, a young woman traveling alone from Boston to teach in a frontier town." Nora found Rebecca easy to talk to as they walked through Sweetwater Creek. She explained her desire to escape the confines of Boston society, her love of teaching, and her father's disapproval of her independent spirit. "After my mother died 3 years ago, there was nothing holding me to Boston," Nora explained as they examined fabrics in the general store. "Father became even more controlling, determined to see me properly settled. When I saw an advertisement seeking teachers for Western territories, I knew it was my opportunity." Rebecca nodded understandingly. "It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind. I came west with my husband 10 years ago. The adjustment wasn't easy, but I've never regretted it." She selected a bolt of calico. "Has Quentin mentioned that he was married once?" The question caught Nora off guard. "No, he hasn't. We've hardly had time for personal conversations." "It was some time ago," Rebecca said, her voice softening. "His wife, Sarah, died in childbirth along with their infant son. That was before he pinned on a badge. He was a rancher then, working land adjacent to ours. After he lost them, he sold his property and drifted for a while. When he returned, he was wearing a deputy's badge, said he needed purpose." Nora felt a pang of sympathy for the stoic deputy. "That's terribly sad. He never remarried." "No." Rebecca paid for her purchases and gathered her parcels. "I think he was afraid to risk that kind of loss again, but enough about my brother's past. Let's collect him and head to the ranch before it gets too late. The sunsets are beautiful from the front porch, and I wouldn't want you to miss your first one." By the time they reached Rebecca's ranch, the sun was indeed beginning to sink toward the western horizon. The property itself was larger than Nora had expected, with a sturdy main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. A corral near the barn held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling plains. "It's beautiful," Nora commented as Quentin helped her down from the wagon. Rebecca beamed with pride. "Thank you. My Thomas built most of it with his own hands. We started with just the main room of the house and added on as the ranch prospered." She gestured toward one of the ranch hands who was approaching. "Miguel, would you please take Miss Zimmerman's trunk to the guest room?" The young man nodded respectfully and lifted Nora's trunk with ease, carrying it toward the house. "Come inside," Rebecca urged. "You must be exhausted after everything you've been through. I'll show you to your room and then we'll have supper." The interior of the house was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. Rebecca led Nora to a pleasant bedroom at the rear of the house, where Miguel had already deposited her trunk. "This will be your room for as long as you need it," Rebecca said, opening the windows to let in the fresh evening air. "The washroom is just down the hall, and there's plenty of hot water. I'll leave you to refresh yourself before supper." Left alone, Nora took a moment to absorb her surroundings. Just yesterday, she had been teaching her class as usual. Now, she was staying at her ranch outside town, hiding from men her father had sent to forcibly return her to Boston. The unreality of it all struck her suddenly, and she sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Zimmerman, Quentin's voice came through the door. Rebecca asked me to tell you supper will be ready in half an hour. Thank you, Deputy, she called back. I'll be there. There was a pause then. It's just Quentin out here, no need for formalities. Nora smiled to herself. Then you must call me Nora. Another pause. All right, Nora, half an hour. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway and found herself wondering what he was thinking. Supper was a pleasant affair, with Rebecca proving to be an excellent cook. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books they had all read, life in Sweetwater Creek, and Rebecca's plans for the ranch. Quentin was quieter than his sister, but contributed thoughtfully when asked direct questions. After the meal, they moved to the porch to watch the last of the sunset, just as Rebecca had promised. The sky was a masterpiece of orange, pink, and purple, with the silhouettes of distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. It's spectacular, Nora breathed, leaning against the porch railing. Worth coming west for, isn't it? Rebecca said with a smile. She glanced at her brother, who was watching Nora with an expression that made Rebecca raise an eyebrow. Quentin, would you mind checking on that new calf? Miguel mentioned she was having trouble nursing this morning. Quentin tore his gaze away from Nora. Of course. He nodded to both women before stepping off the porch and heading toward the barn. Once he was out of earshot, Rebecca turned to Nora with a twinkle in her eye. My brother seems quite taken with you. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm sure he's just concerned for my welfare. It's his job, after all. Rebecca hummed non-committally. Quentin takes his duties seriously, that's true. But I know my brother, and I haven't seen him look at anyone that way since Sarah. She smiled at Nora's discomfort. Don't worry, I won't tease you further. It's just nice to see him showing interest in something besides his work. Before Nora could respond, a ranch hand galloped up to the house, his horse lathered from hard riding. Mrs. Thornton, he called, dismounting quickly. Riders coming, about 6 of them, armed and moving fast. Rebecca's expression turned serious. Get Miguel and the others. Rifles ready, but no shooting unless they started. As the hand ran to alert the others, Rebecca turned to Nora. It seems your father works quickly. Those men must have telegraphed him as soon as they reached the next town. Quentin emerged from the barn, alerted by the commotion. After a quick word with the ranch hand, he strode toward the house, his face grim. Nora, Rebecca, get inside. Lock the doors. This is my home, Quentin, Rebecca said firmly. I'll not hide inside while armed men threaten it. Quentin recognized the stubborn set of his sister's jaw and nodded reluctantly. Stay on the porch then, behind me. He turned to Nora. Your father's men. Most likely, she agreed, her heart racing. What will they do? Nothing, if I have anything to say about it. Quentin checked his revolver, then positioned himself at the bottom of the porch steps, with Rebecca and Nora behind him. The riders appeared at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the darkening sky. As they approached, Nora could see that they were well-dressed and well-armed, not the typical frontier ruffians. The lead rider, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, reined in his horse about 20 yards from the house. Evening, he called, his accent marking him as Eastern educated. I'm looking for Miss Nora Zimmerman. I understand she might be staying here. Who's asking? Quentin replied, his hand resting casually near his holster. Elliot Chambers, attorney for Edmund Zimmerman of Boston. The man produced a document from inside his coat. I have papers authorizing me to escort Miss Zimmerman back to her father in Boston due to concerns about her mental welfare. Quentin's expression didn't change. Those papers hold no authority here, Mr. Chambers. Miss Zimmerman is of legal age and sound mind. She's chosen to make her home in Sweetwater Creek. Chambers sighed as if dealing with a particularly slow child. Deputy, I understand you're just doing your job, but this is a family matter. Mr. Zimmerman is deeply concerned about his daughter's well-being. She left Boston under unusual circumstances. I left because my father was trying to force me to marry a man 3 times my age, Nora called out, stepping forward despite Quentin's attempt to keep her behind him. There was nothing unusual about it except his outrageous behavior. Chambers looked momentarily taken aback at her directness. Miss Zimmerman, your father only wants what's best for you. He's prepared to forgive your impulsiveness if you return with us now. I don't need his forgiveness, Nora retorted. I need him to respect my choices. I'm not going anywhere with you, Mr. Chambers. The attorney's polite facade began to crack. Miss Zimmerman, I have 5 armed men with me. We have authorization from a Boston judge. Do you really think this deputy and a handful of ranch hands can prevent us from taking you? Quentin's voice was dangerously quiet. Are you threatening violence against a woman under my protection, Mr. Chambers? Because that would be a serious mistake. The tension in the air was palpable. Nora could see Rebecca's ranch hands positioning themselves around the property, rifles at the ready. This could turn into a bloodbath, and it would be her fault. Wait, she said, stepping fully onto the porch. Mr. Chambers, I propose a compromise. Return to town and present your papers to Judge Peters tomorrow morning. If he recognizes their validity, I will consider your request. But I will not be forced onto a train against my will, especially not at gunpoint. Chambers considered her offer, clearly weighing the risks of a violent confrontation against the delay. Very well, Miss Zimmerman. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock at the courthouse. He tipped his hat. But I warn you, if you aren't there, we'll return with the local sheriff. Sheriff Wilson is fully aware of the situation, Quentin informed him, but we'll be there. As Chambers and his men rode away, Rebecca let out a breath she'd been holding. That was quick thinking, Nora. You've bought us time. Time for what? Nora asked, watching the retreating riders. Those papers may well be legal, at least in Boston. Quentin turned to face her, his expression serious. Legal or not, they can't force you onto a train if you're married to a local citizen. He paused, meeting her startled gaze. It's just a suggestion, mind you. A marriage of convenience that could be annulled later if you wished. Nora stared at him, speechless. Rebecca looked equally shocked by her brother's suggestion. Quentin Irving, are you proposing to Miss Zimmerman after knowing her for exactly 1 day? Rebecca demanded. A flush crept up Quentin's neck. I'm offering a solution to a problem, Becca, a legal way to ensure her father can't force her return. To Nora, he added more gently, you wouldn't be bound to me any longer than you wished. Once your father gives up his pursuit, we could end the arrangement. Nora found her voice at last. That's quite an offer, deputy. She tried to keep her tone light. Most men at least buy a lady dinner before proposing marriage. Rebecca laughed, breaking some of the tension. He did help serve you supper not an hour ago, so perhaps he feels he's covered that requirement. Quentin ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically flustered. I apologize if I've offended you, Miss Zimmerman. It was merely a practical suggestion. No offense taken, Nora assured him, though her mind was racing. Marriage, even in name only, was an extreme solution. Yet she couldn't deny that it would legally sever her father's control over her. And there was something about Quentin Irving that made the idea less alarming than it should have been. Let me think about it. We still have until morning to decide on a course of action. Rebecca linked her arm through Nora's. A wise decision. These things shouldn't be rushed, even when they're just for show. She shot her brother a look that Nora couldn't interpret. Now, I think we could all use a cup of coffee after that excitement. Come inside. As they moved toward the house, Quentin caught Nora's elbow gently. I meant what I said. It would be on your terms entirely. She looked up at him, noting the earnestness in his blue eyes. Why would you do this for me? The truth, please. Quentin was silent for a moment. Because I believe everyone deserves the freedom to choose their own path. Your father is trying to take that from you. He hesitated, then added quietly, and because there's something about you that makes me want to help, even if it means binding myself to you on paper. Nora felt a flutter in her chest at his words. Thank you for your honesty. I'll consider it carefully. Inside, Rebecca busied herself with the coffee pot while Nora and Quentin sat at the kitchen table, an awkward silence between them. Finally, Quentin cleared his throat. There may be another way, he said. Judge Peters could grant you legal independence if you can prove yourself sufficient and of sound mind. It would take time, though, and your father's men might not wait. Nora nodded. I've been saving most of my teacher's salary. It's not much, but it proves I can support myself. And the school board has been pleased with my work. Those are points in your favor, Quentin agreed. But Eastern courts tend to give fathers considerable authority over unmarried daughters, regardless of age. A husband's claim would supersede your father's immediately. Rebecca placed mugs of coffee before them. Let's not forget that Mr. Chambers has 5 armed men with him. If the judge rules against Nora, they could attempt to take her by force again. Nora wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Then I think we need to be prepared for all possibilities. Tomorrow, we'll present my case to Judge Peters. If he rules in my favor, wonderful. If not. She took a deep breath and looked directly at Quentin. I accept your offer of marriage, Deputy Irving. Quentin's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by her decisive answer. You're certain? As certain as I can be under the circumstances. I'd rather be temporarily married to a man of my choosing than permanently forced to return to my father's control. She managed a small smile. I assume you have no objection to being chosen. A slow smile spread across Quentin's face, transforming his features. No objection whatsoever, Miss Zimmerman. Rebecca looked between them with a knowing expression. Well, I think that settles it. If necessary, we can have Preacher Williams ready after the meeting with the judge. She sipped her coffee. Now I suggest we all get some rest. Tomorrow promises to be eventful. That night, Nora lay awake long after retiring to her room, her mind too active for sleep. The events of the past 2 days had upended her carefully constructed life in Sweetwater Creek. She had come west seeking independence, and now she was contemplating marriage, even a marriage of convenience to preserve that very independence. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her thoughts turned to Quentin. There was something compelling about the quiet deputy, a depth of character that attracted her. In Boston, she had danced with countless eligible men at countless tedious social functions, yet none had intrigued her as Quentin did after just 2 days of acquaintance. Perhaps it was the circumstances of their meeting, or perhaps it was something more fundamental, a recognition of kindred spirits. Dawn was breaking when Nora finally drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought being the memory of Quentin's blue eyes as he made his unexpected proposal. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dressing quickly in her most formal dress, a navy blue affair with white trim that she reserved for school board meetings, Nora made her way to the kitchen. Rebecca was at the stove, while Quentin sat at the table, reading a telegram. "Good morning," Nora said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Both Irvings looked up. Quentin folded the telegram and stood. "Morning, sleep well." "Well enough," she lied, accepting the cup of coffee Rebecca offered. "Any news?" Quentin held up the telegram. "From Sheriff Wilson. He's done some digging on Chambers and his men. They're legitimate attorneys and agents from Boston, but their papers may not hold up under local scrutiny. The sheriff will meet us at Judge Peters' office." Nora nodded, relieved that the local law was on her side. And if the papers are valid, then we proceed with Plan B, Rebecca said briskly, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before Nora. Eat up. Can't face legal battles on an empty stomach. Despite her nerves, Nora found she was hungry. As she ate, Quentin outlined their approach for the meeting with Judge Peters, emphasizing the points that would strengthen her case for independence. Most importantly, he concluded, let the judge see your conviction. You're not a flighty girl running from responsibility. You're a woman who made a considered decision to build a life of your own. Nora appreciated his confidence in her. I can do that. I know you can, he replied with a smile that warmed her more than the coffee. The ride into town was tense. Quentin drove the wagon, with Nora beside him and Rebecca in the back. They had decided that Rebecca's presence might lend Nora additional respectability in the judge's eyes. As they approached Sweetwater Creek, Nora could see activity around the courthouse chambers, and his men had already arrived. Judge Peters' office was a small room adjacent to the courthouse proper. The elderly judge, with his white beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, greeted them cordially enough, though his expression turned serious when he saw the size of the gathering. This is quite the assembly for a simple legal matter, he commented, settling behind his desk. Sheriff Wilson has briefed me on the situation, but I'd like to hear from all parties directly. Chambers stepped forward, presenting his papers with confident flourish. Your Honor, I represent Edmund Zimmerman of Boston. These documents, signed by Judge Harrison of the Suffolk County Court, grant Mr. Zimmerman continuing guardianship over his daughter, Nora, despite her age, due to concerns about her mental stability and judgment. I am authorized to escort her back to Boston immediately. Judge Peters examined the papers carefully, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concentration. These appear to be in order from a legal standpoint. However, they were issued in Massachusetts, not the Wyoming Territory. He looked at Nora. Miss Zimmerman, do you wish to contest these papers? I do, Your Honor, Nora said firmly, stepping forward. My father is attempting to force my return because I refused to marry the man of his choosing and decided to pursue my own path instead. There is nothing wrong with my mental faculties or judgment. I have been employed as Sweetwater Creek schoolteacher for 6 months, living independently and contributing to this community. Judge Peters nodded thoughtfully. Sheriff Wilson speaks highly of you, Miss Zimmerman. He says the school board considers you an exemplary teacher. Chambers interjected smoothly. Your Honor, while Miss Zimmerman's teaching abilities aren't in question, her father has serious concerns about her welfare. She left Boston without notice, abandoning her family and social responsibilities. Mr. Zimmerman merely wishes to ensure his daughter's safety and proper care. I'm quite capable of caring for myself, Nora countered. I have my own income, my own residence, and I've formed connections within this community. My father's concern is not for my welfare but for his control over me and potentially my inheritance from my mother. The judge looked surprised. Inheritance, you say? Yes, Your Honor. My mother left me a substantial sum that becomes fully mine when I turn 25 or marry, whichever comes first. Until then, my father manages it as trustee. I believe his sudden interest in my return coincides with his recent engagement to a much younger woman. Chambers' expression tightened. Miss Zimmerman is speculating, Your Honor. Mr. Zimmerman's personal life has no bearing on this matter. Judge Peters held up a hand. I'll determine what has bearing, Mr. Chambers. He studied the papers again. These documents cite erratic behavior and unsound judgment as the basis for continued guardianship. Can you provide specific examples? Chambers cleared his throat. Miss Zimmerman abandoned a secure position in society to travel alone to the frontier, taking up residence among strangers. She rejected a highly advantageous marriage arranged by her father. She has consistently demonstrated impulsive behavior and disregard for social norms and family obligations. So her mental instability consists of making choices her father disapproves of, Judge Peters asked dryly. That's thin evidence, Mr. Chambers, particularly given her successful establishment here. Your Honor, Quentin spoke up for the first time. As deputy sheriff, I can attest to Miss Zimmerman's sound character and judgment. Yesterday, Mr. Chambers' colleagues attempted to force her onto a train against her will, in full view of witnesses, including myself. That action suggests it is not Miss Zimmerman's judgment that should be questioned. Judge Peters frowned at Chambers. Is this true, sir? Were physical means employed? Chambers shifted uncomfortably. My colleagues may have been overzealous in their approach, but their intentions were proper. They were acting under legal authority to return Miss Zimmerman to her father's care. Legal authority that hadn't been recognized in this jurisdiction, the judge pointed out. He sighed, removing his spectacles to polish them thoughtfully. This is a complex matter. Massachusetts law and territorial law don't always align neatly, particularly regarding women's independence. He replaced his spectacles and looked at Nora. Miss Zimmerman, while I'm sympathetic to your situation, I must acknowledge that these papers, problematic as they are, do have a certain legal weight. Under normal circumstances, I might be compelled to honor them. Nora's heart sank. She glanced at Quentin, who gave her a subtle nod. However, the judge continued, I'm reluctant to force a capable young woman to return to a situation she has deliberately left, especially given the concerning behavior of Mr. Chambers' colleagues. I need time to consider this matter carefully. Chambers stepped forward. Your Honor, with all due respect, Mr. Zimmerman expects his daughter's immediate return. A delay would cause him considerable distress. Judge Peters' expression hardened. Mr. Chambers, you're in my jurisdiction now, and I will take whatever time I deem necessary to make a proper determination. Miss Zimmerman will remain in Sweetwater Creek until I issue my ruling. And if she attempts to leave town in the meantime, Chambers pressed. She will remain under the protection of the local law. Sheriff Wilson spoke up from his position near the door. Any attempt to remove her forcibly will be met with arrest. Judge Peters nodded agreement. I'll have my decision by tomorrow morning. Until then, this meeting is concluded. He tapped his desk with finality. As they filed out of the office, Nora felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. They had gained time, but the judge hadn't rejected her father's claim outright. Once outside, Chambers approached her, his manner less cordial than it had been in the judge's presence. Miss Zimmerman, I advise you to reconsider your position. Your father is prepared to use his considerable influence if necessary. This delay is merely postponing the inevitable. Quentin stepped between them. Mr. Chambers, Miss Zimmerman has made her position clear. I suggest you wait for the judge's decision before making further approaches. Chambers' eyes narrowed. You're overstepping your authority, deputy. This is a family matter. It became more than that when your colleagues tried to abduct her yesterday, Quentin replied evenly. Now, if you'll excuse us. He guided Nora toward the wagon where Rebecca waited, keeping himself between her and Chambers. Once they were out of earshot, Nora released a shaky breath. The judge seemed sympathetic, but he didn't dismiss the papers outright. What now? Now we implement Plan B, Quentin said quietly. Are you still certain about this? Nora looked into his eyes, finding reassurance in their steady blue depths. Yes, I won't risk being forced back to Boston. Rebecca leaned forward from the wagon. I've already spoken to Preacher Williams. He's waiting at the church. Quentin offered his arm to Nora. Well then, Miss Zimmerman, shall we? The small church at the edge of town was empty except for Preacher Williams, a kindly older man with perpetually ink-stained fingers from his devotion to sermon writing. He greeted them warmly, having been briefed on the situation. Marriage is not something I typically rush into, young folks, he said seriously. But Rebecca has explained your circumstances, and I understand the necessity. Still, I want to be sure you both enter into this with clear eyes. We do, Preacher, Quentin assured him. This is to protect Miss Zimmerman from being forced to return to Boston against her will. The preacher looked at Nora. And you, Miss Zimmerman. You understand that while this begins as a marriage of convenience, it is still a binding union before God and the law, Nora nodded. I understand, Preacher Williams. This is my choice, freely made. Satisfied with their answers, the preacher positioned them before the simple altar. Rebecca stood as witness, her expression a mixture of concern and hope. The ceremony was brief but dignified. Quentin had somehow procured a simple gold band, which he placed on Nora's finger with surprisingly steady hands. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond a handshake or guiding touch. The kiss, brief as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through Nora. She found herself looking at Quentin with new eyes, suddenly very aware that this man was now, legally, her husband. Preacher Williams completed the necessary documentation, which Rebecca witnessed. I'll file these with the county clerk immediately, he assured them. By sundown, it will be official record that Miss Nora Zimmerman is now Mrs. Nora Irving. The name sounded strange to Nora's ears. Mrs. Irving. She had never expected to take a husband's name, especially not under such unusual circumstances. Outside the church, Rebecca hugged them both. I'll take the wagon back to the ranch and pack some of your things, Nora. I assume you'll be staying in town tonight, Quentin nodded. At my house. It would look odd if we didn't at least maintain appearances for a while. Nora felt a flutter of nervousness at this reminder of the practical implications of their arrangement. Of course, they would need to live together, at least temporarily, to make the marriage seem genuine. As Rebecca drove away, Quentin turned to Nora with a slightly awkward expression. I should probably show you where you'll be staying. They walked through town toward the residential area, maintaining a respectable distance between them despite their new marital status. Nora was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople, many of whom would be surprised by the sudden marriage of their deputy to the schoolteacher. Quentin's house was at the end of a quiet street, a modest but well-maintained cabin with a small front porch. Inside, it was neat and sparsely furnished, but comfortable. A sitting room with a stone fireplace opened to a small kitchen, and two doors at the back presumably led to bedrooms. It's not much, Quentin said, watching her take in her surroundings, but it's solid and warm in winter. It's lovely, Nora replied honestly. The house had a sense of peace about it, reflecting its owner's straightforward nature. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Quentin gestured to one of the doors at the back. That room was meant to be a study, but I put a bed in there for guests. It's yours for as long as you need it. My room is next door. Nora appreciated his immediate clarification of the sleeping arrangements. Thank you. This is all very considerate of you. Quentin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. I should get back to the sheriff's office, let Wilson know what we've done. Will you be all right here alone? I can show you where everything is first. I'll be fine, she assured him. Go attend to your duties. I think I could use some quiet time to absorb everything that's happened. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll be back for supper. There's not much food in the house, I'm afraid. I usually take meals at the hotel dining room." "I can cook," Nora offered. "If you show me what supplies you have, I could prepare something." A smile touched Quentin's lips. "You don't have to do that. You're not really my wife, remember?" "No, but I am really your house guest and I'd like to contribute," Nora replied with a small smile of her own. "Besides, I enjoy cooking when it's not an obligation." Quentin showed her the modest contents of his kitchen cupboards and the small vegetable garden behind the house before departing for the sheriff's office. Left alone, Nora explored her temporary home more thoroughly. The guest room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the garden. Quentin had clearly made an effort to make it welcoming, with clean linens and a small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. The gesture touched her unexpectedly. In the main room, she noticed details she had missed during their brief tour. A bookshelf filled with a surprising variety of volumes, from practical manuals to poetry, a guitar propped in one corner, a framed photograph on the mantel. Curious, she examined the photograph and felt a pang when she realized it must be Sarah, Quentin's late wife. The young woman in the image had a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to look directly at the viewer. Nora carefully replaced the frame, feeling like an intruder into Quentin's past grief. By late afternoon, Nora had prepared a simple but satisfying meal from the available ingredients. A vegetable stew with the last of a ham bone for flavor, and cornbread baked in the small iron stove. The domestic activity had calmed her nerves, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed the day's events. She was setting the table when Quentin returned, bringing with him the scent of the outdoors and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something smells wonderful," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It was no trouble," Nora assured him. "Cooking helps me think." Quentin placed the package on the table. "I brought you something, a wedding present of sorts." His tone was lightly self-mocking, but his eyes were serious. Nora unwrapped the package to find a small leather-bound journal with a silver pencil attached. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely pleased. "I thought you might want to record your thoughts during this." "Unusual time," Quentin explained. "And I remembered you mentioning that you kept a journal in Boston." Nora was touched that he had remembered such a small detail from their conversations. "Thank you. It's a perfect gift." Over supper, Quentin shared news from town. Chambers was furious when he learned we'd married. He went straight to Judge Peters, claiming it was a transparent ploy to circumvent your father's authority. "What did the judge say?" Nora asked anxiously. "He said that whether it was a ploy or not, a legal marriage supersedes a father's guardianship, regardless of Massachusetts court papers. As my wife, you're under my protection now, not your father's." Quentin smiled slightly. "Chambers demanded to know when we'd met and courted, suggesting the marriage was fraudulent. The judge pointed out that frontier marriages often happen quickly, and our personal history was none of Chambers' business as long as the marriage was legally performed and registered." Relief washed over Nora. "So it worked. They have to leave me alone. Legally, yes. Chambers has no grounds to force you back now, but he's not giving up easily. He's telegraphed your father and is awaiting instructions. I doubt Edmund Zimmerman will accept this development without a fight." Nora sighed. "No, he won't. My father doesn't lose gracefully." She pushed her stew around her bowl, suddenly less hungry. "I've disrupted your life terribly, Quentin. I'm sorry for that." Quentin shook his head. "Don't apologize. I offered this solution freely." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Besides, my life could use a little disruption. It's been quiet since Sarah died." Nora looked at the man across the table, her husband in name, a virtual stranger in reality. Yet she felt a connection to him that defied their brief acquaintance. "Tell me about her, if you don't mind." Quentin was silent for a long moment, and Nora feared she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice low and thoughtful. "Sarah was a school teacher like you. That's how we met. I was building my ranch, and she came west to teach at the settlement school. She was brave and kind and loved books." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. "We were married for just over a year when she fell pregnant. We were so happy about the baby, but there were complications." He fell silent, and Nora reached across the table to touch his hand lightly. "I'm sorry. Rebecca told me a little." Quentin nodded. "After I lost them, I couldn't bear to stay at the ranch. Too many memories. I sold it and drifted for a while, took whatever work I could find. Eventually, I realized I needed purpose again, something to give my life meaning. That's when I pinned on a badge. And does it give your life meaning?" He considered the question seriously. "Most days, I help people maintain order. It's worthwhile work." His blue eyes met hers directly. "What about you? Does teaching give your life the meaning you sought when you left Boston?" "Yes," Nora answered without hesitation. "When I see a child grasp a new concept, their eyes lighting up with understanding, there's nothing like it. In Boston, I was valued for my family name and potential dowry. Here, I'm valued for what I can contribute, what I can teach." They continued talking long after the meal was finished, discovering shared interests in books and music. Quentin admitted he played the guitar, but only for his own enjoyment, while Nora confessed that, despite years of lessons, she played piano badly and with great reluctance. "My mother insisted I learn," she explained with a laugh. "She said no gentleman would marry a girl who couldn't provide musical entertainment. I think she gave up hope when my playing sent the family cat into fits." Quentin laughed, the sound warming the small kitchen. "I'd like to hear you play sometime, fits and all." "Only if you'll play your guitar," Nora countered. A fair exchange of musical torture. The evening passed pleasantly, the initial awkwardness between them easing as they talked. By the time they prepared to retire, Nora felt as if she had known Quentin much longer than 2 days. There was an ease to their conversation, a natural rhythm that surprised and pleased her. At her bedroom door, Quentin paused, suddenly awkward again. "If you need anything during the night, I'm just next door. Don't hesitate to knock." Nora nodded. "Thank you for everything, Quentin. I know this isn't how you imagined your life would go." A slow smile spread across his face. "Life rarely goes as imagined, Nora. Sometimes it's far more interesting than we could have planned." He leaned down and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Good night, Mrs. Irving." The formality of the name contrasted with the intimacy of the gesture, sending a shiver down Nora's spine. "Good night, Mr. Irving," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As she prepared for bed in the small guest room, Nora found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been a single school teacher, determined to maintain her independence. Now she was a married woman, albeit under the most unusual circumstances. And the most surprising part was how right it felt to be here, in this modest house, with a man she barely knew but already respected deeply. She opened the journal Quentin had given her and began to write, recording the extraordinary events and her conflicted feelings. By the time she set the journal aside and extinguished her lamp, she had come to a realization. This marriage of convenience might be the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. The following days established a routine of sorts. Nora returned to teaching, wearing her new wedding band and fielding curious questions from her students and their parents about her sudden marriage. Quentin resumed his deputy duties, though he made a point of escorting Nora to and from school each day, both for her protection and to reinforce the appearance of a normal marriage. Chambers and his men remained in town, waiting for instructions from Edmund Zimmerman. Their presence was a constant reminder that Nora's troubles were not yet fully resolved, despite the legal protection her marriage provided. Life in Quentin's house settled into a comfortable pattern. Nora took over the cooking and much of the household management, partly out of gratitude and partly because she genuinely enjoyed creating a home. Quentin, for his part, seemed pleased by her touches, the wildflowers she gathered for the table, the curtains she sewed for the kitchen window, the shelves he built at her request to organize his previously haphazard collection of books. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking. Sometimes Quentin would play his guitar, his strong fingers drawing sweet, melancholy tunes from the strings. Occasionally, they would walk through town together, presenting the image of a normal married couple to curious onlookers. They slept in separate rooms, maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement. But Nora found herself increasingly aware of Quentin's presence in the house, the sound of his movements in the next room, the scent of shaving soap that clung to him in the mornings, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something she said. A week after their hasty wedding, Nora was tidying the sitting room when someone knocked at the door. Opening it, she found a telegram boy holding an envelope. "Telegram for Mrs. Irving," the boy announced importantly. Nora thanked him and tipped him from the household money Quentin had insisted she manage. Closing the door, she opened the telegram with a sense of foreboding. "Daughter, stop your behavior, shocks and disappoints, stop marriage, clearly a desperate ploy, stop returning to Boston, immediately with Chambers, stop marriage, will be annulled, stop, this is not a request, stop." Father Nora's hands trembled as she reread the terse message. Despite her marriage, her father was still attempting to control her life, still refusing to accept her choices. She was still standing there, telegram in hand, when Quentin returned home for lunch. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, crossing to her side. Wordlessly, she handed him the telegram. His expression hardened as he read it. "He doesn't give up easily, does he?" "No," Nora agreed, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "He never has. My father believes that enough pressure, enough force will eventually bend anyone to his will." Quentin set the telegram aside and took her hands in his. "Nora, listen to me. You're my wife now, legally. He can't force you to return to Boston or annul our marriage without your consent. Not here, not under territorial law." Nora squeezed his hands gratefully. "I know. Logically, I know he can't touch me legally anymore, but emotionally." She shook her head. "He's been a looming presence my entire life, Quentin. His disapproval, his control, his manipulation. Even thousands of miles away, I still feel it." Quentin's expression softened. Without speaking, he drew her into an embrace, his strong arms encircling her protectively. Nora leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. It was the first time he had held her this way, and she was surprised by how natural it felt, how safe she felt in his arms. "You're stronger than you know," Quentin murmured into her hair. "You left everything familiar to build a new life on your own terms. That takes courage few people possess." Nora looked up at him, touched by his faith in her. Their faces were close, his blue eyes intent on hers. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, and realized with a jolt that she wanted him to. The moment was broken by another knock at the door. Reluctantly, they separated. Quentin answered the door to find Sheriff Wilson on the porch. "Sorry to interrupt your lunch, Irving," the sheriff said, nodding respectfully to Nora. "But Chambers and his men are making preparations to leave town. Thought you'd want to know," Quentin frowned. Leave when? Tomorrow morning's train, from what I gather. They've booked passages. The sheriff glanced at Nora. Might be your father's given up, madam. Nora held up the telegram. No, Sheriff. He sent Chambers new instructions. He wants me to return with them, marriage or no marriage. Sheriff Wilson's bushy eyebrows drew together. Well, that's not happening unless you want it to. You're a legally married woman now, and your husband's right here saying you're staying. He adjusted his hat. I'll keep an eye on Chambers. If they try anything foolish before they leave, they'll find themselves in my jail. After the sheriff departed, Quentin turned to Nora with a determined expression. We need to be prepared for anything. Chambers strikes me as the type to follow his employer's instructions to the letter. Nora nodded, her earlier distress replaced by resolve. What do you suggest? We stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone until they're gone. I'll speak with some of the ranch hands from Rebecca's place, have them keep watch overnight. He touched her cheek gently. We've come this far, Nora. We won't let them take you now. That evening, Nora noticed Quentin checking and cleaning his revolver at the kitchen table, his movements precise and practiced. Seeing her watching, he explained, just a precaution. I don't expect trouble, but it's best to be prepared. Nora sat across from him, oddly fascinated by the procedure. Have you ever had to use it? In your duties, I mean. Fired it, yes. Hit someone only twice. His expression turned somber. Taking a life isn't something I'd ever do lightly, Nora, even to protect you, but I would if necessary. The quiet intensity of his statement sent a shiver through her. This man, whom she had married for convenience and protection, was prepared to defend her with his life if needed. The realization both humbled and frightened her. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, she said softly. Quentin reassembled the revolver with deft movements. Indeed. Usually, the sight of a determined deputy with a drawn weapon is enough to discourage most foolishness. Despite their vigilance, the night passed peacefully. In the morning, Quentin insisted on accompanying Nora to school as usual, with the added precaution of asking one of Rebecca's ranch hands to keep watch outside the schoolhouse during the day. The train leaves at noon, Quentin reminded her as they approached the schoolhouse. Once Chambers and his men are on it, we can relax a bit. Until then, don't leave the building without Miguel nearby. Nora nodded, touching his arm. I'll be careful, you do the same. He smiled, his eyes warm as they rested on her face. I always am. On impulse, he leaned down and kissed her cheek, a public display that would reinforce their marriage in the eyes of any watching townspeople, but which sent her pulse racing nonetheless. The morning dragged interminably. Nora found it difficult to focus on her lessons, her mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Chambers and his men, of her father's anger, of Quentin's protective presence. When noon approached, she dismissed her students for lunch, intending to meet Quentin, who had promised to return at midday to report on Chambers' departure. She was erasing the blackboard when a noise at the door made her turn. Instead of Quentin or Miguel, she found Elliot Chambers standing in the doorway, his expression grim. Miss Zimmerman, he said, deliberately using her maiden name, or Mrs. Irving if you prefer the charade. Nora set down the eraser, maintaining outward calm despite her racing heart. Mr. Chambers, shouldn't you be boarding your train? That's why I'm here, to escort you to it. He stepped into the classroom, and Nora noticed two of his men positioning themselves outside the door. Your father has been quite explicit in his instructions. Nora stood her ground. I'm not going anywhere with you, Mr. Chambers. My father no longer has authority over me. I suggest you catch your train before it leaves without you. Chambers smiled thinly. Your father anticipated your resistance. He's prepared to be quite generous if you return willingly. Your inheritance will be released to you immediately, rather than waiting until you're 25. A substantial sum, as I understand it. My freedom is worth more than any amount of money, Nora replied firmly. Now please leave my classroom. Chambers' smile faded. I had hoped to do this civilly, Mrs. Irving, but I have my orders. He gestured, and his two men entered the room. Your father insists on your return. The marriage can be dealt with later. Nora backed away, looking for an escape route. Where's Miguel, the man who was watching the school? Taking a little nap behind the building, I'm afraid. He'll wake with a headache, but no permanent damage. Chambers nodded to his men. Restrain her. Gently, if possible. As the men approached, Nora grabbed a heavy book from her desk and hurled it at the nearest one, striking him in the chest. She darted toward the side door, but the second man intercepted her, grasping her arm roughly. Let me go, she demanded, struggling against his grip. Now, Mrs. Irving, there's no need for dramatics, Chambers said, approaching with a length of rope. We're simply fulfilling your father's wishes. He knows what's best for you despite your confused state. The only confused person here is you, Chambers, came a steely voice from the main doorway. If you think you're taking my wife anywhere. Quentin stood framed in the doorway, his revolver drawn and pointed steadily at Chambers. Behind him, Sheriff Wilson and two deputies covered the other men. Let her go, Quentin ordered, his voice dangerously calm. Now. The man holding Nora hesitated, looking to Chambers for direction. Chambers himself appeared momentarily nonplussed, but quickly regained his composure. Deputy Irving, he acknowledged coolly. We were just explaining to your wife that her father requires her presence in Boston. Family matters to discuss. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go, Quentin replied. And attempting to abduct a married woman is a serious offense, even in Boston. Here, it might get you shot. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward. Mr. Chambers, you and your men are under arrest for attempted kidnapping. Drop any weapons and raise your hands. For a tense moment, it seemed Chambers might resist. Then, with a disgusted sigh, he raised his hands. This is a misunderstanding, Sheriff. Mr. Zimmerman merely save it for the judge, Wilson interrupted. Mr. Zimmerman's authority doesn't extend to my town, especially not to abducting married women from their classrooms. As the sheriff and his deputies disarmed and restrained Chambers and his men, Quentin crossed to Nora, holstering his weapon. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. No, just shaken, she assured him, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. How did you know? Miguel didn't report in as scheduled. I knew something was wrong. His jaw tightened. When we found him unconscious behind the school, I feared the worst. Is he all right? He'll have a nasty headache, but he'll recover. Quentin's expression softened as he looked at her. You put up quite a fight from what I saw. Nora managed a weak smile. I threw a dictionary at one of them. A chuckle escaped him despite the seriousness of the situation. Remind me never to cross you when you're near your bookshelves. Sheriff Wilson approached them as his deputies led the prisoners away. They'll be held in jail until the circuit judge arrives next week. Attempted kidnapping, assault on Miguel, probably a few other charges we can add. He looked at Nora sympathetically. Mrs. Irving, you might want to consider telegraphing your father directly. Make it clear that these tactics won't work and will only result in his agents facing jail time. I'll do that, Sheriff, thank you. Nora hesitated, then added, What about the train? Won't they miss it? Wilson smiled grimly. Oh, they'll miss it all right. I suspect they'll be guests of Sweetwater Creek for quite some time. He tipped his hat to her. I've canceled school for the remainder of the day, madam. After what happened, I think the children can have an unexpected holiday. After the sheriff left, Quentin turned to Nora with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, relief mixed with something deeper, more intense. "I thought I might lose you," he said quietly. The simple statement, delivered without drama but with profound sincerity, touched something deep within Nora. Without conscious thought, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his cheek. "You didn't. You won't." For a heartbeat, they stood perfectly still, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Then Quentin leaned down and kissed her, not the chaste kiss of their wedding ceremony or the friendly peck on the cheek from earlier, but a real kiss, tender and questioning. Nora responded without hesitation, her arms sliding around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal feeling. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I know this began as an arrangement," he murmured, "a marriage of convenience." "But Nora, I know," she interrupted softly. "I feel it too. This stopped being just an arrangement for me days ago." Relief and joy washed over his features. "I was afraid it was just me, that you were simply playing a part." Nora shook her head. "No part, Quentin. What I feel for you is real, unexpected as it may be." He kissed her again, briefly but with unmistakable promise. "Let's go home, Mrs. Irving. I think we have some things to discuss." As they walked through town toward their home, Quentin's arm protectively around her shoulders, Nora marveled at the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking independence, determined to stand on her own. Instead, she had found a partnership more equal and fulfilling than she could have imagined. That evening, seated before the fire in what was now truly their home, Nora composed a telegram to her father. With Quentin's support, she found the words to make her position absolutely clear. "Father, stop. I am happily married. Stop. My life is here now. Stop. Further attempts to interfere will be met with legal consequences. Stop. I wish you well with your new marriage. Stop." Nora Irving, as she handed the completed message to Quentin to be sent in the morning. Nora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she was truly free of her father's control, not because she had run away, but because she had found the strength to stand her ground, with the support of the man she was coming to love. "You think he'll finally accept it?" Quentin asked, setting the telegram aside. "Eventually," Nora replied. "My father hates to lose, but he's also practical. When he realizes he can't win this battle, he'll retreat and focus on his new wife." She smiled wryly. "Besides, he'll find it harder to gain sympathy when attempting to force the return of a happily married schoolteacher than an unmarried daughter." Quentin nodded thoughtfully. "And are you happily married?" Nora met his gaze steadily. "I'm getting there. Are you?" A slow smile spread across his face. "More than I ever expected to be again." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding band. "When I offered to marry you, I truly meant it as a temporary arrangement, a solution to your problem. I didn't anticipate falling in love." Nora suggested when he hesitated, his blue eyes darkened with emotion. "Yes, I thought that part of my life was over after Sarah died. I never imagined I could feel this way again, especially not so quickly." "I've never been in love before," Nora admitted. In Boston, marriage was discussed as a practical arrangement, a suitable match of families and fortunes. What I feel for you is nothing like that. It's overwhelming sometimes. Quentin brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We can take this slowly, Nora. There's no rush." That night, for the first time, they shared a room, Quentin's larger bedroom, with its comfortable bed and view of the stars through the window. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, a physical expression of the deeper connection that had formed between them over the past remarkable days. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Nora traced the contours of Quentin's face with her fingertips, memorizing every line and plane. "I never thought I'd thank my father for anything," she murmured. "But if he hadn't sent those men to force me onto that train, We might never have met." Quentin caught her hand and kissed her fingers. "I like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are meant to be." "The romantic deputy," Nora teased gently. "Who would have guessed?" he chuckled, pulling her closer. "Only for you, Mrs. Irving, only for you." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm for Nora and Quentin. Chambers and his men were tried and sentenced to 6 months in territorial prison for attempted kidnapping and assault, a verdict that sent a clear message to Edmund Zimmerman about the consequences of further interference. Edmund himself eventually replied to Nora's telegram with a terse message of his own, acknowledging her marriage and washing his hands of her future welfare. Though the words were harsh, Nora felt only relief at this final severance of her father's control. As summer turned to fall, Nora and Quentin's relationship deepened and strengthened. What had begun as a pragmatic solution to a crisis had blossomed into a genuine love match that became the talk of Sweetwater Creek. Nora continued teaching, expanding the school's curriculum to include advanced subjects for older students. Quentin remained deputy sheriff, respected throughout the territory for his fairness and courage. They visited Rebecca's ranch often, helping with seasonal work and enjoying the family connection. Rebecca, for her part, was delighted to see her brother truly happy again, his grief finally healed by the love of a woman as strong and independent as he was. One crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Quentin took Nora's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. He smiled. "Perhaps, but I've been thinking about our future. This house has served us well, but with the school growing and your plans for the library." "And the baby," Nora added softly, placing her free hand on her still flat stomach. Quentin's eyes widened, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder. "Baby, are you certain?" Nora nodded, joy bubbling up within her at his reaction. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a child, Quentin, in the spring." His face transformed with a smile more brilliant than any she had seen before. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." The shadow of his past loss passed briefly over his features, and Nora touched his cheek gently. "Dr. Miller says I'm in excellent health." "Everything will be fine," Quentin nodded, pushing away his fear to embrace the joy of the moment. "This calls for a change of plans, then. What I was about to suggest seems even more appropriate now." "What were you going to suggest?" Nora asked curiously. "That we build a new home, on the edge of town where there's more space. I've saved most of my wages over the years, and with your teaching salary, we could afford a house with room to grow." His eyes twinkled. "Room for a nursery, it seems." Nora's heart swelled with love for this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. "I think that's a wonderful idea." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with promise and plans for their future together. When they parted, he kept his arms around her, both of them gazing out at the painted sky. "Did I ever tell you," Quentin said reflectively, "that the moment I knew I was falling in love with you was when you stood on that train platform, refusing to leave despite those men trying to force you aboard? Your courage that day astounded me." Nora leaned against him, content in his embrace. "And did I ever tell you that when you said she's staying right here, I felt for the first time in my life that someone was standing with me, not trying to control me? That's when I began to trust you, though I barely knew you." Quentin rested his cheek against her hair. "I meant those words with everything in me, though I didn't understand why at the time. Something about you called to something in me, Nora. It still does, every day." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, giving way to the first stars of evening, Nora reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking independence and had found it not in isolation, but in a partnership based on mutual respect and deep love. The road ahead would have its challenges, but she would face them with Quentin at her side, both of them stronger together than they could ever be apart. "I love you, Quentin Irving," she whispered. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Nora Irving, now and always." In the months that followed, they built their new home on a gentle rise at the edge of town, a spacious house with plenty of room for their growing family. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it wildflowers and birdsong, the nursery was ready, painted a soft yellow and furnished with a cradle Quentin had crafted with his own hands. When their daughter was born on a perfect May morning, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair, they named her Sarah Rebecca Irving, honoring both the past and the present, while looking forward to a future bright with promise. And in years to come, when their children asked how they had met, Quentin would always begin the story the same way. "Well, they tried to force your mother onto a train, and I said, 'She's staying right here.' And Nora would always finish it. And I've been right here ever since, exactly where I belong."